Chapter 6. She reluctantly accompanied Clint to his office, where she spent more than an hour being examined from head to toe, prodded, and x-rayed, because Dr. Carey wanted to see her right away. She was sent home with instructions to stay in bed for at least 24 hours and to call Clint if she experienced any nausea or unusual tiredness, because it was only a mild concussion. Sultry from the office visit and emotional strain, Maggie said tersely on the way home, "I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll just make it up." He drew deeply from his cigarette. He said, "No sweat, Maggie." She closed her eyes and rested her head against the window. When they returned home, she was fast asleep, barely conscious that she had been carried upstairs and tucked into her bed. She was unaware of the tall, somber figure that had been silently observing her for almost an hour with such intensity that it would have startled her if she had seen it. She was stiff and sore the following day, but the headache and some of the heartache had passed. After a week, she could return to the apartment, Jana, and her new career, erasing all of this. All of this. Clint. Clint. She closed her eyes pitifully. She would have to say goodbye to him for good this time. Jana and Emma wouldn't understand if there were ever any more trips to the ranch, even for a few days in the summer. By then, there would need to be a compelling reason. Perhaps if she worked abroad? Clint said to her from the doorway, "If you keep frowning like that, you'll have premature wrinkles." She gave him a cursory glance and saw that his dark head was bare and he was wearing a sharp gray business suit in place of his jeans. He was extremely handsome and had more of a businessman's appearance than a rancher's. Glancing down at her icy hands, she asked sweetly, "Going away, I hope?" He replied, a mocking smile brushing against his hard mouth. "For a few days." "That might lift your spirits," I thought. She said that it was really improving her mood. After a prolonged silence, he turned away from the door and stood next to the bed, gazing down at her with strangely solemn, dark green eyes. "Better head?" he inquired. She gave a nod. "Many thanks." Her eyes met his in tense silence as a result of the low note in his deep voice. "Why were you afraid to touch me that day by the stream?" he asked. She could feel the color warming her cheeks and hated it. "Why can't we just let it end?" "No way! No way can we!" he fired back, appearing menacing all around. He took a seat on the bed next to her. "Tell me." She tried to push back against the pillows so she wouldn't have to touch him. "With you, it's all just a game," she muttered. "You enjoy making fun of me for being a woman because you are very knowledgeable about them and can tie me up in knots without even trying. Clint, I'm a human being, not a toy, and I dislike being used." His dark face was expressionless as he fixed his gaze on her. He said, "You thought I was playing, Maggie?" Her gaze remained fixed on his tie's silken knot. With regret in her voice, she said softly, "I should never have come. The summer I embarrassed myself is still there, like a curtain you like to draw back occasionally, so I'll always remember what I did." She asked sharply, "Don't you think I've been punished enough, Clint?" He curtly said, "I'll agree with you on one point. You weren't supposed to come." "Why did I consent to being talked into it?" she reminded him. "I would be leaving in another week." Then he asked, his eyes narrowing and evaluating, "Back to what?" Then he asked, his eyes narrowing and evaluating, "Back to what? Going back to the boyfriend who cheated? Going back to work in his office as before?" Her bottom lip quivered. "Clint Collins, it's none of your business where I go or what I do." His smile was derisive. He answered, "Thank God." She let out a deep sigh. "You are the most annoying man I have ever met, hands down," he teased, "so you're going to run out on me. Go away from me without a secretary and with no hope of getting one before you go." She gave him a sharp reminder. "You said 2 weeks. 4, please." "Clint," he said softly, "just until Jana comes, little girl." She averted her gaze from him. "I'm not welcome here." He suddenly became serious and said, "No, I don't," adding, "Remind me one day to tell you why. In about 5 years." She asked sharply, "Is it going to take that long to make up an answer?" He took a long time examining her face. Finally, he said, "No, but it seems that it will take that long for you to mature enough to comprehend the response. You poor old doddering thing, will you be around then?" She posed the question with a mocking innocence. His hands closed around her face, clamping it firmly against the pillow. "Would you please quit making fun of my age, you damned little annoying cat?" "It's fair play to turn around," she remarked sweetly. "You never miss a chance to remind me of mine." "And you've never given it any thought as to why, have you?" he snarled. She applied pressure to his firm chest. "Do you not have something to catch, like a bus, train, or airplane?" she whispered. He glared down at her, his lips drawing a thin line. "Can I rely on you to stop playing foolish games until I return?" "Harebrained," she shot back. "And who exactly offended me in the first place? You wouldn't have freaked out while I was making love to you." She let out a gasp. His thumb touched her lips, quelling her furious outcry. "If you hadn't given up," he muttered, "I would have been too." Her gaze shot up to meet his. She jerked away from the camera. "You tell yourself that I would have allowed you to." She came back. "Or Philip," he murmured. He narrowed his eyes at the color of her cheeks. "I doubt I've ever met a more chaste woman than you. For a long time, Maggie, I mistakenly believed that you were afraid of anything physical, but you're actually terrified of everything physical. It's hard for you to let go of a man." She asked calmly, "Am I?" being careful not to reveal to him how near to the truth he was. "Or does believing that I am soothe your pride?" He scowled. "You little brat!" and leaned forward to grasp her face with long, savage fingers that he drove into her temple hair in order to hold her. Maggie, was that too close to the truth? Her hands pressed helplessly up against his chest. "Give me up! You believe you know everything." Her head was suddenly freed from the fingers holding it, allowing her wrists to catch her like traps and slam up over her head, pinning them to the bed. The way he gazed down at her flailing body and the fierce half-smile that burned in his sharply defined mouth conveyed an oddly brutal sense. "Wildcat, fight me," he murmured in a low, menacing voice. "I enjoy it when you quarrel." She twisted reflexively, but only her eyes were free to struggle as his body lowered to partially enclose hers, pressing her slenderness into the mattress. He looked down at her with something akin to triumph, and the look on his dark face scared her almost as much as the green fires burning deep in his eyes. His sparkling eyes moved to her trembling, parted mouth. She trembled in protest. "Don't," as his dark head lowered. All he did was laugh, confidently and softly. He said, "Try being a woman instead of a cowering child," as he accepted it from her soft mouth. She let out an indignant cry as the kiss's punishing force took effect. She remembered fighting him for a short while, until she felt the sting of his teeth on her tender lips, until the warm, steely closeness burned through her bedclothes, until he made her shaky mouth open for him and gave her feelings she had never been able to experience. When his mouth released its pressure and became caressing, seductive, arousing, she started to relax involuntarily. He let go of her wrists, and his warm, long-fingered hands cupped her face, gently tilting it as he kissed her more deeply, a level of intimacy she had never experienced with a man. A faint, indiscernible protest escaped her. "Not yet," he whispered softly, breathing in unison with her while he nipped seductively at the smooth curves of her lips. "Give me another kiss." She opened her wet lashes languidly to see him staring back at her through confused, misted eyes. She could see the faint creases surrounding his eyelids and the dark brows above them because he was so close. Her fingers lifted in wonder and followed them down to the faint line of a frown that furrowed his brow. Slowly he pulled back, examining her. Her hair was wild and disheveled, her mouth parted, and her eyes shimmered with a combination of wonder and pleasure. He whispered, "Beautiful little cat," and his breath caught as he spoke. His fingers found their way into the dense ball of hair at her ears and began to stroke. "You have emerald-like eyes. Maggie, I like how you feel beneath me." Her heart pounded beneath the warm crush of his chest as she tried to catch her breath, her lips parting. "You hurt me," she said in a whisper. He whispered, "That's what it's all about, little girl." His lips gently touched hers. He whispered against the softness, moist and bruised. "You bit me." Drowsing with pleasure, she sighed against the dragging bravado of his warm mouth. "You bit me back," she whispered. He chuckled quietly. He pondered, observing the closely spaced, braised little mouth beneath his. "I was afraid I'd drawn blood. Never before have I fought so desperately for a kiss." Her eyes clouded, lips pouting up at him. She muttered, "Well, don't think I enjoyed it." "Did you not, my dear?" As she raised her hand in a silent plea, he asked a deep question and leaned down to tease her mouth with his in a heady, coaxing pressure that tore a moan from her throat. However, he withdrew and rose with a fluid, elegant movement, lowering his cold, hard gaze to meet hers. His dark hair was tousled, and the touch of her lips made his mouth sensual. His silk tie was unkempt, and he had an extremely menacing and masculine appearance. He looked away to adjust his hair and tie in her mirror. He asked absently, "What are you going to do while I'm gone?" She struggled to gather herself and held on to the bed linens as though they were her only chance at survival. "Task, I guess. Did you leave any letters to be completed?" Coolly, he replied. Not a word. He lit a cigarette he had taken from his pocket. "Give it a day or two more before resuming your routine, little one. I would prefer that you not relapse." With caution, she massaged her swollen wrists and arms before glancing accusingly at him. "Isn't it a little late for that concern?" He flashed a sly smile. In his deep voice, he asked without a hint of sympathy, "Did I bruise you?" "Indeed," he teased, "and you loved every second of it, you little hypocrite. I nearly regret stopping now. You would have been ripping my back to ribbons in just a few more minutes." The implication took her by surprise. "You are so daring. You sound like something straight out of a really old Victorian novel," he said, his face full of mischief. "Maggie, was it shocking to you that you could have such intense feelings for a man, feelings so strong that it made you want to bite and claw him?" She focused on the clasped hands on the bed coverings, her eyes dropping like hot irons. "But," she whispered, "that wasn't how it was. Not that I was fighting you. The next time you decide to use those formidable young hands on me, I hope you'll remember this," he said. "How would you put it?" she complained. There was no humor in the narrow level gaze that he met hers.
"I want you,"
he said bluntly, without preamble. "You'd better keep in mind that I don't need much encouragement either. I no longer carry the same little girl around on my shoulders as you used to. God, I love touching you, and you feel like a woman. You are a woman." Her entire body turned red. "If you believe I would allow it," he retorted, "you just did." She flashed. "You didn't touch me." "Calmly, we both know I could have," he remarked. "I will give you this. At first, you fought me like a tigress. However, I didn't stop you, did you?" She didn't deny it, but she gave him a glare. She was unable to. Taking a long drag from his cigarette, he narrowed his eyes and studied her. "I was mistaken to believe that there was any chance of this occurring, as I have since discovered. Little girl, keep an eye on yourself. I'm not above using every dirty trick in the book when I'm aroused because I know a hell of a lot more about it than you do." She did not meet his gaze. She told the bed covers, "You always used to say I didn't affect you like that." He replied tightly, "Honey, you're not any more shocked about it than I am. That day by the stream, I was just making jokes about you, just like I had been doing ever since you arrived. However, the first time I felt that soft mouth beneath mine as I laid you down beneath that tree. Maggie, please stop breathing. If only you hadn't pulled back your hand when you did, and if only it hadn't accidentally hit me in the wrong place." He moved to stand next to the bed and cast a brooding glance down at her, narrowing his eyes. "Did you simply not understand what it meant, you little fool, or couldn't you feel my hands shaking?" She ducked her head to conceal her face from him behind a cloud of dark hair. She looked pitifully at him, saying, "I had no idea what that meant." He spoke softly. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, little innocent. Though I'm not attempting to woo you, I am still susceptible to your charms. You're not the type of woman a man uses, Maggie. You shouldn't be in my life. You were meant for a white wedding and kids. Are you not aware of that?" She gave a nod. "Clint, I've always known that," she muttered. "You've never concealed your feelings regarding marriage." "Through a cloud of smoke," he said angrily. "I don't like being tied down. Maggie, I just cannot bear possession. To put it simply, I have never loved a woman, and I have never found one that I wanted that much. I don't possess it." Her gaze pounced on his visage. She said, "I don't remember proposing to you." With a laugh, he lifted his dark face from seriousness. "Irishly, it's just as well. The first week, we would kill each other." "Indeed." She traced the bedspread's design. "To be honest, I also dislike having things. Or being harassed," she slyly continued. He had a prolonged period of silence. "So why did you decide to wed Philip? He did not control me." "Couldn't or didn't?" he questioned. "Could you guide him with your nose? Was that the draw?" She said to him, "You go to hell." All he could do was smile, lips taunting her. "It will require a great deal of taming," he remarked speculatively. "The man who will get to do it has almost my envy." But only a man like Clint, she reasoned, would relish it, would see it as a challenge and turn it into a pleasure beyond the realm of the imagination. She whispered defensively that the right man wouldn't have to fight me. As he studied hers, his expression was calm and serious. "How wasteful," he said softly. "I dislike how obedient you are." "Margaret Donahue, how could you be certain?" She posed a challenge. "That's not how you've ever seen me." He narrowed his eyes. Silently, "I don't think I'd want to," he answered. "When you fight, Irish, you're very fierce. You could probably love a man just as much. It would be like owning a wax doll to submit to you. His gaze lowered to her full mouth. Just once, I would like to feel that soft mouth burning with passion. Her eyes resisted his advances. She threw at him, "You won't. Never again." She could feel his heart stop at the look in his eyes as he whispered, "Don't bet on it." He glanced back at the photo she had taken as he turned and opened the door. "I miss you. Hold your breath until I do, please." Sarcastically, she smiled. With a wink, he left, shutting the door firmly behind him, saying, "Stay away from the horses while I'm gone." She cried angrily and buried her face in the pillow.